Welcome to another episode of Rich Dad StockCast. I'm your host, Denney, and today we're diving into one of the most powerful financial educational tools ever created, Robert Kiyosaki's CASHFLOW Board Game. If you've ever wanted to learn how money really works, how to get out of the rat race, or how the wealthy think differently about income and investing, this game doesn't just teach it, it makes it real. Joining me today is Rich Dad expert Andy Tanner. We're going to unpack the lessons inside the cash flow game and how they apply to building wealth in the real world. Now, quick note before we get started. If you want your own copy of the cash flow board game, use code ANDY at checkout to get 10% off site-wide, or just click the link in the show description below. And as always, make sure to grab your free investing tools and resources at stockcastbonus.com. It's your starting point for smarter investing, no matter where you're at today. All right, Andy, welcome back to the show.
Del, it's great to be with you. Can't wait to talk about this. This is one of my favorite things to talk about, and I'm kind of a walking advertisement, I guess, for that cash flow game. It as much as anything is responsible for the foundation of the financial education of my children. And we have students all over the world. I think at the Cashflow Academy, we have, I want to say 172 countries represented now. So we've got students everywhere. But there's no students that were more important to me than my two boys. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that feel the same way about wanting to help their kids learn financial education, but it's also key for adults. So it is a tool, and this will be a great opportunity to explain why it's been so effective and why it is so effective. So this will be great.
I'm excited to dig in on the cash flow game, but before we dig in, I want to ask about stockcastbonus.com. What do our listeners get for going there?
Really cool. We love to give things away for free as a way to give people a taste of what can happen. I know when I go to Costco or go to a big box store, they're always giving out free samples of this or that to see if I like it. And I like that idea. It gives me confidence to say, hey, that was pretty good. Let's get some of that. And I will tell you, I have found in teaching for, I don't know how many decades have been, coming up on 30 years, I guess, of teaching, that there are so many people that will pick up a book like Rich Dad, Poor Dad and want to do something. I remember when my wife and I read the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, we're like, well, let's go out and, and buy houses. And it was such a great context shift, but we didn't have much detail of how to go out and actually execute this. So one of the things we have is a jump start. And if you go to stockcastbonus.com, we've got some free download there. It doesn't cost anything, and there's an ebook. It's such an important ebook because it shows people how to start to make that first step, build that bridge from A, where the starting point is, to B, building your dream. And in the cash flow game, which we'll be talking about, the very first thing, I think it's really cool, the very first order of business, once you get everything set up and everyone organized around the table and you're ready to proceed, is the very first step is to choose your dream. And there's lots to choose from that represent, various, wonderful things in life you could achieve. And Stephen Covey said to begin with the end in mind, right? That's one of his habits. And so very, very important to get to stockcastbonus.com, get your download, and take a quantum leap towards getting assets and getting out of the rat race.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Now, the cash flow game, amazing game. I think our listeners will realize that as we go on if they haven't played it already. But let's start from the top. How is the cash flow board game different than something like, let's say, Monopoly?
Well, maybe we ought to start with its origin. And I hate speaking for Kim Kiyosaki or for Robert Kiyosaki. I don't like people putting words in my mouth, but I do know the origin story. They've told it many times, and I've been around when they told that story and shared it with me. So I don't think I'd be too far amiss in telling the origin story. When Robert and Kim, they bought some real estate And they did not have, hundreds of millions of dollars. They started out and they were, not even making $1 million a year. They were making about $10,000 a month passively. So about 120,000 a year, but it was passive. And that was the big key. And people would approach them and say, how did you do this? How is it that, Robert was 47 and Kim was 37? And that's in the 30s. That's really young to retire. And even in the 40s, that's young to be doing what you want to do. And people would approach them and say, how did you do this? And so it was in response to say, well, how could we best teach people how we did this? Others just trying to explain it. And Robert, of all the teachers that I've had, I had two really, really important teachers in my life, and they were very similar in many ways. First, I had a great college basketball coach who was inducted into the College Basketball Hall of Fame. And I was a terrible basketball player, but I learned so much about learning actively. Can you imagine being a swimmer and never getting in the pool? Trying to read a book on swimming and then hop in the pool and, well, that didn't work out. And many things are actively learned. AI is really an interesting thing because it's doing white collar stuff better than we can do it in many areas already. And anyone who thinks, I remember the guy says, those that think will govern those that labor. And that's not true anymore. Those that think are going to be governed by AI. It's just going to replace thought. And before we hit the information age, where thinking jobs and manipulating information came about, you used to be a longshoreman, or you'd go be a fisher, or you'd be a mechanic, and those working with the hands jobs were much more prevalent, I guess. And we learned by doing. There was the journeyman, the apprentice. So Robert, as a master teacher, said, like my coach, let's learn by doing things. Let's go to practice. And that's how you learn to play basketball is you don't sit in a classroom. You actually go out and do the real thing. It's called a scrimmage and it's called drills. And so the cash flow game was designed as practice. It was designed to simulate, to compress time, and to simulate the real experience of getting out of the rat race and becoming rich, and to create the context and the mental pathways to do that. So that's how the board game was. And they said, let's make it a game, because in a way it is a game. They had played Monopoly. Robert played Monopoly with his rich dad and said that 4 green house and red hotel was a nice start to how to think, when money was changing hands and someone would land on it and rent would come in. And it wasn't very robust, but it was a start. So they took those ideas of how do we teach people in a simulation and their experience, with that kind of a low end Monopoly experience, and they created the cash flow game. So that's the origin story of it. So I changed your question, but I think the origin story is important to know that, Robert and Kim they didn't have hundreds of millions of dollars then. They're making about $10,000 a month passively. Of course, they've grown their wealth, huge since then, and they now play a game that we call the fast track. But that's how the cash flow game started. And one more little origin on this. So I think, now don't hold me to this one, but I think they were in Fiji, and they were just enjoying themselves in Fiji, and Robert decided to write a brochure for the cash flow game. And the brochure got longer and longer. And when he's done with the brochure, it was Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, he didn't sit down and says, I'm going to write a book about my rich dad and my poor dad. It was actually a brochure for the cash flow game that just got long and changed into a book.
That's really interesting. I never knew that. That's a really cool origin story.
Yeah. So that's how that came about.
Speaking of the lessons learned in the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, the cash flow game, um, one of the lessons is, I think you mentioned it. Financial freedom occurs when your passive income meets or exceeds your expenses, right?
Yes.
They had, I think you said $10,000 a month of passive income in.
Right.
And I think that's mind blowing to say, hey, well, you don't need $100 million to retire. You just have to have enough passive income coming in. Now, going back to the game, what other core lessons does the game
Yeah.
teach that most people don't learn in
So,
school?
so the biggest difference, in my opinion, and I'm just giving my opinion, is that Monopoly's mostly played on the board, and that's not so. The Cashflow game has a board, but it's really played on the financial statement. So the very first lesson in financial education, for sure, there's just no question about it. You begin with understanding how financial statements work. And I've had more people, including myself, especially when I didn't know how financial statements work. Boy, you can get yourself in trouble if you don't know how to track that. And so understanding the relationship between the balance sheet, the income statement, and a statement of cash flow, those three statements make up what we call a financial statement. And that's really where that works. Now, here's what's really interesting. My sons started learning financial education before they could do math. And what is absolutely essential is to understand that currency is like electrical current, or like a current of a river or an ocean current. It moves. Cash does not rest very often. One of the metrics the Fed puts out on the St. Louis Federal Reserve website, you get all these cool graphs, is called the velocity of money, which is how often a dollar changes hands. You can have the size of the money supply. You can also have the rate at which that money moves on average by quarter. So you can say, oh, a dollar moves once a month on average, or once a quarter on average, or once a week on average. And the faster the velocity of money, the better the economy grows, and the more we got going on. So you can begin to learn, and this is what we did with our kids, is we did what Robert did in the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, is you can literally learn how a financial statement works with no numbers. In fact, in my opinion, it's better to learn with no numbers. And instead of numbers, you use arrows. And there are so many cash flow patterns that you can draw. So many ways money can move into a financial statement. It always moves out through expenses, but it helps you understand shrinking and expanding of the asset column, shrinking, expanding of the liability column, how cash flows in and out. So my sons really, really got good at understanding good cash flow patterns from poor cash flow patterns, and the cash flow patterns of the rich from the cash flow patterns of the poor, with arrows. And between those lessons and then playing the cash flow game, mom and dad would help add. And when they were before they even learned math, we would team up, and they understood the concept that this was an asset that would bring money into us. How much, they didn't have a great concept yet because they couldn't add, but they did understand what money was, and that assets would bring money to them. So getting out of the rat race is an accounting game. It's a game of buying things that, like you say, getting the passive income above expenses. And then you move into the next phase of the game. You move from the rat race phase to the fast track phase. And the fast track phase is a lot of fun. What's interesting is, though, the most fun part of the game really is the moment you feel like you've won. Essentially, it really changed because, I guess according to the rules, if you get your dream first, you win, right? But what I used to do when we started to play, I've conducted probably more cash flow games than any human being other than Darren Weeks. Darren Weeks has got me beat. He used to do these in Canada, do these huge cash flow games. But I used to do them every Saturday for groups of, 100 people or so. And I've done so many of these. one of the cool things that I did is I said, what if we changed it? And instead of competing against each other, what if we helped each other and see how fast we could get everyone out of the rat race if we collaborated instead of competed? It's not even a question. Everyone gets out faster every time when you work together as a team rather than fight each other. So there's just so many lessons. I could do a full 3-day workshop, 8 hours a day on that cash flow game, and it might be the best seminar a person's ever attended. And I've done those, and it's life changing when you learn all the things that game brings to the table. It's beyond. I know it's beyond what Robert and Kim really thought it could do, because they couldn't have foreseen the lessons that were going to come out in that thing. They did understand the context shift, but the individual lessons are innumerable.
That's amazing. And I want to get into more of these lessons, but first, let's do this. Let's take a break. We're just getting started to breaking down the cash flow game and how it can change the way that you think about money. But when we get back, listeners, Andy's going to walk us through how this game actually teaches investing concepts.
Let me interrupt. We should do I would be unapologetic about doing a commercial. So I told Sarah when we were toying around with this idea of I really want to do an episode on the cash flow game. I said, give them a discount code. And I go, I want people to have an opportunity to buy this game because it changed my life, changed my kids' lives. So before we go, let's plug that thing a couple times. Is there a place they can go, or am I going to mess up the script if I do that?
No. If you look in the show description, so if you look in the notes, listener, just click the link, and the code is Andy. So make sure you just click the code Andy, and it's 10% off site-wide as well.
Andy with a Y. That's 4 letters. That's easy. Andy Y. That's great. That was a good idea, whoever come up with that.
Absolutely. All right, listeners, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
So far, it's been great. I needed a source where I could really enrich my education through stocks. I didn't really have an avenue for it, and it's helped me a lot. The simplicity has really gotten me on the track to where I enjoy the learning as well as it's really solidifying in my mind. And like, they're not just trying to sell you something, they really care about the people that are in the course, and they really do care about you and your personal goals, and what you want to do is to help you and your family and whatever your goals are in life through that. So it's really been great.
All right, Andy, let's get back into how the game actually teaches investing. So let's start with this. You've said before that, playing this game can reveal someone's financial mindset, in just a few minutes. What are some of the common mistakes that people make in the game and in real life?
Laziness, first of all. When you lay out the game, you get the board game out, and you'll have the game pieces, and get the game laid out. Once you choose your dream, that's the first order of business. The second order of business is to choose the person to your side, and that person's going to be your auditor. And it's their job to double check your math to make sure you're not making mistakes or cheating. And a lot of people, that's an extra step that they say, I trust you, or it'll be fine. And they don't use an auditor. Well, Robert and Kim tell a life-changing story about Betty the bookkeeper. Marcy and I have Laurie the bookkeeper. They had Betty the bookkeeper. And what Betty the bookkeeper did is kept them on track. And they would meet with Betty once a month. And Betty would make them, it was an accounting. It was an accounting of what they had and what they did and what they were spending money on, and whether they are, putting enough in investments or buying doodads or whatever it was. And Marcy and I took that lesson. It's like, wow, you should have a bookkeeper in your life, someone other than you. Coaches will, I have a coach that I think he's my least favorite coach, and he's my best friend from high school. And when we go to lift together, I hate it because that dude has no empathy for anybody else's pain. And he will push you further and further because he doesn't care. He just does not care. It's like, yeah, I know you're tired, but I'm not. So let's go, another round. And just brutal. And it's the same thing. A bookkeeper, when emotion goes up, intelligence goes down. And when you're in the first person, present or future, that person in that tense, your limbic system lights up because there's danger there. But once you go to second or third person or past tense, nothing is threatening you. And so a bookkeeper will keep rules where a person gets emotional, might not. They won't make the purchases that don't make sense. And they'll say, no, you need to make the purchases that make sense. Get some courage here. So having the auditor to your left and having the bookkeeper in your life, huge lesson. So they did that on purpose. So that's one of the mistakes. Another one, I think, is underestimating the power of a game. I remember I would conduct these huge cash flow games, 100 people, and we'd have 6 people to a table, round tables, and all over a room in a hotel room. And I would have arrogant people say, look, I came here to learn how stocks worked. I didn't want to, play a game. Games are for children. I don't need a game. I said, all right, well, you can stay if you want. You can go if you want. But let's see how good you are. The accountants couldn't play it. The doctors can't play it. The engineers can't play it. In fact, it was the people you wouldn't expect caught it quicker because they didn't overanalyze it and the context wasn't ruined. And these very intelligent people, very smarter than me, by far. That's not an exclusive club to be smarter than Andy. It's the majority of the planet. But I will tell you, these people got humbled really quick because they didn't know how to make a financial decision. When the game would present them with whether to buy stock or not, or sell stock or not, or buy a house or not, they were baffled, and they didn't even know how to put it on a financial statement and how it would interact. Blew my mind that the lack of education in school had some of our most intelligent people with advanced degrees could not build a financial statement and could not make a simple decision on whether to buy an asset, whether it was a smart one or whether it was a dumb one. And after you've played a while, it becomes pretty obvious pretty quick. So it was astounding that the arrogance was a huge mistake by these guys, and it humbled them really quick because they're like, well, I guess I don't know how to make these financial decisions. And as you make mistakes, that's the mistakes you want. You don't want the mistake of arrogance. You don't want the mistake of not having an auditor and not following rules. You want to make the mistakes in the game, and you want to lose money and say, oh, why did that happen? What did I learn from that? And you get a certain amount of experience and savvy in how that game is constructed. So those are some of the mistakes, some good that you want to make and some you want to avoid.
Oh, absolutely. And it makes me think of that classic phrase, how you do anything is how you do everything. If you're cheating on the board game, you're probably cheating in life.
That's another, hey, you brought up, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I blew it. There's a mistake by me. But I will tell you, if you see someone trying to cheat in the game, you're exactly right. You know how their brain works. And if they're willing to cheat in the game, that means those thoughts are in their head, right? It is a huge reveal. And I had a friend of mine that's very successful, and we were playing it with his family one time, and he noted that. He says, before I do a business deal, I should have their families come over and play this game and watch how much they know, watch how they think, and see if they look to cheat in some way, because people do, and it's surprising. So you bring up a good point there, Del.
What a litmus test that is. Mm-hmm. That is a great idea. My next business partner, I'm going to make them play the
Cashflow game and see if they cheat or if they know what they're doing or not. Right?
Yeah. How about that?
There's another thing I might add on this, and we could talk for hours on this. Kenny McElroy, I don't know if it was Kim Kiyosaki or Kenny McElroy that coined this term, but it kind of became a joke. Those guys get all kinds of deals coming across their desk. And there was one particular day where we were having a meeting, and if memory serves, Kenny actually brought this deal that came out big, thick brochure, lots of pages and shiny stuff. And he was showing what a bad deal it was. And he says, the bigger the brochure, the worse the deal, because they have to hide it in all this fluff and have to create all this window dressing and put lipstick on the pig. And if you've played the cash flow game, you'll have a basic sense of how things should run and what a cash flow pattern should look like. We've seen partners or people. I had one guy I know that wound up raising all of this cash. And when I would talk amongst, we'd kind of talk amongst ourselves about this guy, and we're like, how does he make money? This doesn't add up. Something's wrong. And sure enough, he was running a fraudulent business. So it's very educational, because there's not an entity in the world that it doesn't represent. Schools have a financial statement. Nations have a financial statement. People, households have a financial statement, whether they keep it or not. There's always, nonprofit organizations like the Red Cross or a Boys and Girls Club. They have income, expenses, asset, liabilities, and a statement of cash flows. They have balance sheets, and everyone has these. So part of your financial education is knowing how to manipulate your own and knowing how to read the others, because it'll make you smarter. It gives you the lighting to kind of see whether something is a great one or not. And this game it's unbelievable how effective it really is. If you haven't played it, play it. It's an investment in yourself that'll change the way you think about money. And besides that, my motto is fun, simple, and real. It's fun. It's a game. It's fun to play. It's fun to learn that way.
Now, speaking of getting smarter, let's talk about the power of repetition. You could even touch on Edgar Dale Cone of Learning. I geek out on that stuff. Yeah. Why is it helpful to play the cash flow game over and over again and not just once?
Yeah, the late Edgar Dale was a professor, I think. Don't hold me to this. I think he was at Arizona State, and he developed this thing called the Cone of Learning. His posterity's kind of it's been rough. They're like, hey, my great-grandfather invented the Cone of Learning. No one can talk about it but us. But as a result of that, it's less widely known now. His family, in my opinion, has kind of curtailed its use. The best advertisement in the world was Robert, and they did a good job of it. But it really just talked about how people learn. I don't know. I guess he did a study somehow to get the data, but people retain like maybe 10% of what they read, and maybe a little bit more of what they hear. If you teach something and do a dramatic presentation, it's a little better. And if you simulate the real experience, it's a lot better. And if you actually do the real thing like an apprentice, that is the best way to learn, is by doing the real thing. Well, in investing, doing the real thing can cost you a lot of money, and those mistakes can be hard to recover from. They're usually not fatal to your financial life. But it's kind of like in stocks. We always use a simulated trading account to simulate the real experience, because it's the closest thing you get to the real thing is simulator. Think Apollo 13. They're up there in the what was it, the LEM, the lunar module, whatever it was, the LEM, and it's this, limping along, this damaged, injured spacecraft, and they've got to figure out a power-up sequence. And they said this is like driving a toaster through a car wash, to get this power-up sequence with this condensation from everything being off. So Gary Sinise goes in a simulator. They wake him up at night. They call him and say, hey, we need a power-up sequence that doesn't push our amps too far to get this LEM up and run. We got to power things up in the right order. So he gets in there and he's doing it, and he's going through it. He's going through it in the simulator. He's blowing up and dying and blowing up and dying and killing the thing. And they're doing this in the simulator until they get it right. Because if you got Forrest Gump up in the air, you got to have that thing right for him. He's not going to figure it out. He'll follow his instructions, but he's not going to figure it out on his own. So, that simulating the real experience on the ground instead of in the space is a great way to learn and iron out mistakes. And why not learn your mistakes in the CASHFLOW board game? These sophisticated, or I guess their self-concept was they were sophisticated. I'm a so-and-so, I've got this degree. I go, well, that's fine, but you don't know anything about money. Just because your genius has been focused here doesn't mean we know everything. And why not make those mistakes in the game? Because those people get revealed so fast. It blows your mind, and the context is really different, and how they think is really different. And it's amazing to watch the transformation in a 3-hour bout with the Cashflow game. It's fun.
Wow. Andy, this has been incredible. Last question.
Yeah.
If someone wants to improve their financial IQ and stop guessing about money, what would you say to them about the Cashflow game?
Well, I'd give one final story if I could. And this is one of the really fun memories of all the, I spent 14 years traveling on the Rich Dad Advisor team. And what an education that was. And Robert, one time he said, let's go to Argentina. And let's go to, I think it was Argentina, Paraguay. It seemed like there was one more stop. Maybe it was in Brazil. I can't remember. It was in South America. And I remember we were in Buenos Aires, and the promoter, Fernando, who's still a dear friend, he not only invited me as one of the advisor team, he invited my family to come. And he gave us my kids will never forget. He took us to Iguazu Falls and, private planes, and he had an escort. I don't know how he pulled the strings. We had a police escort to a professional soccer game, and down in South America, they take their football, their soccer pretty serious. Incredible, just fun. We had meetings with the mayor of Paraguay. I mean, just crazy, awesome stuff for my kids. But the highlight of the trip was we were in Buenos Aires, and it was a large group of people. I can't remember the exact number, but I want to say it was thousands. I mean, it wasn't a hundreds meeting. It was a thousands of people meeting. And everyone had headphones on so they could be translated into Spanish, or so that they take our English translated into Spanish. And they were diagramming a moderate, not an overly complex deal, but certainly above the pay grade of a beginner, on a couple of easels and the cash flow. And it was interesting. And out of nowhere, Robert says, hey, Zach, David, and they are in, I would say probably the 3rd grade and the 5th grade. And so David's a 3rd grader. He's 8 years old, 9 years old, probably, which is right about the time Robert starts the book Rich Dad Poor Dad. He's 9 years old with his buddy, trying to figure out money. And he calls my kid up on stage, and he says, hey, break down this deal. And he hands them microphones and says, break down this deal. Tell everyone about how this works and why. And so my kids break down this deal, and little David winds up at this the deal was an infinite return. He says, this didn't start as an infinite return. He understood the concept of infinite return, no risk. He goes, it didn't start that way, but I'll show you how it ended up that way. And he walked through until it was infinite. And the crowd was just like, what? And then at the book signing later on that night, my poor kids, no one wanted me to sign their book. They wanted my kids to sign the book. And little David at 9 years old, it's like midnight. He's trying to keep his eyes open, signing books. And I said, what'd you learn? He goes, well, Dad, I want to be rich, but I don't want to be famous. This is terrible. But here's the thing about that is it was not all kids are born geniuses. All of them are. Buckminster Fuller said they just get degeniusized by adults as they grow up. And my boys, it wasn't like they're better than average or smarter than other kids, but the financial education was brought down. It wasn't they ascended to a great height at all. It wasn't like they went up. The education was brought down, and any kid, I promise, any kid, you pull them out of a grade school, any average kid would have done the exact same thing. It was not a highlight of genius on their part. The genius was in the game brought down the education to a simplicity where it's understood by kids. And when a couple of people says, man, how long have you been training? I says, look, we just play the cash flow game, man. That's the only reason they understand all this stuff is I didn't teach it to them. Robert didn't teach it to them. Kim didn't teach it to them. The cash flow game taught it to them. And they just had a sense of cash flow and how things worked. And it was the foundation from which they grew. So it's life-changing. Why do you have your kids play the cash flow game? So they get rich and they won't move back in with you. That's not one thing. But even for adults, I remember one time they were talking about the cash flow game with some of their basketball teammates. This is probably 6th grade. And some of their basketball teammates wanted to play this cash flow game. I says, well, let's have a cash flow party at my house. And tell them to invite all the parents. And so we set up chairs around the living room for the parents to observe. And the kids got down on their hands and knees and played the game on the floor. And the parents were like, what? And they wanted to play. They like, this is what I need. They're watching their kids intuitively learn this stuff. And they're like, what? So it's just, I've got so many stories of how this has impacted my life that I thought, let's do an episode and I'll do my best infomercial to get this game in people's hands. It's a wonderful educational investment. And it's one that I know people will find life-changing.
That's amazing. That is amazing. Andy, thank you for sharing that. That is a great note to end on. And again, if you want to grab your copy of the Cashflow Board Game, just go to our website or go to the link in the description below and use the code word Andy with a Y, A-N-D-Y, for 10% off. Guys, that wraps up today's episode of Rich Dad StockCast. The Cashflow Game isn't just fun. It's one of the best tools to practice financial decision-making in a risk-free environment. It's a mindset shift in a box, if you will. And a huge thank you to Andy Tanner for walking us through how powerful this game really is. And if you're ready to go deeper and to start applying these ideas in real life, head over to stockcastbonus.com. We've got free tools for you over there that pair perfectly with what you've learned today. If you've got value from this episode, do me a favor, subscribe, like, share it with someone who's ready to break out of the rat race. Thanks again for tuning in to Rich Dad StockCast. I'm Denney. Stay smart, stay invested, and take control of your financial future.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.